work together. The future of our region depends on it.
El 11 de septiembre de 2001, la Asamblea General de la OEA adoptó en Lima, por unanimidad de todos sus Estados miembros, la Carta Democrática Interamericana. Esta resolución fue resultado de una solicitud que la Cumbre de las Américas, reunida en abril de ese año en Quebec, le hiciera a la organización regional. Esta carta es el último eslabón de un desarrollo pionero del sistema interamericano desde la adopción en Bogotá en 1948 de la carta por la que se constituyó la Organización de los Estados Americanos, OEA. El contexto era muy diferente del de décadas anteriores.
The decade of the 90s was unique for the hemisphere. In South America, military regimes realized that modern societies were too complicated to be ruled with bayonets. In Central America, the Cold War, the proxy war between the United States and the Soviet bloc had worn itself out, and there was a sense that the only solution was not military, but political and democratic.
La Carta Democrática aprovecha ese momento para definir que la democracia representativa es la suma de muchos elementos que la integran y enumera los esenciales, entre ellos el respeto a los derechos humanos y las libertades fundamentales, el acceso al poder y su ejercicio con sujeción al Estado de Derecho, la celebración de elecciones libres, periódicas y transparentes, el régimen plural de partidos y organizaciones políticas y la separación e independencia de los poderes públicos. Pero ello no bastaba.
En muchos de los países de América del Sur, los países de América Central también estaban terminando largos periodos dictatoriales, generalmente terminados además en conflictos y guerras civiles muy dolorosas. Entonces, el primer trabajo en el marco de la OEA es: no queremos más los golpes militares. Ese fue el primer entorno, y sobre eso hubo un consenso a principios de los 90. Pero luego se fueron produciendo estas nuevas modalidades de alteración, y ahí se genera un nuevo consenso en la región. Tampoco queremos estas nuevas modalidades de alteración del orden constitucional.
Esas nuevas modalidades tenían una forma específica. Gobiernos legítimamente electos eran los que subvertían la democracia. Así, la Carta contempló mecanismos para afrontar el caso de una amenaza, una alteración grave o incluso una ruptura del orden democrático.
La defensa interamericana de la democracia es el concepto fundamental. También lo es la democracia como derecho de los pueblos de las Américas. Esos son los dos puntos en los cuales la Carta Democrática Interamericana introduce también fuertes innovaciones en cuanto a que no solamente es una responsabilidad de cada país defender la democracia en el hemisferio, sino que son todos los países responsables de la defensa de la democracia en el hemisferio y la Secretaría General.
En los mismos instantes en que en Lima se aprobaba la Carta, el mundo se convulsionaba por los atentados en Nueva York y Washington. Al día siguiente, el mundo ya no sería igual. Gracias a la Carta, tampoco lo sería la manera en la que las Américas protegían la democracia. Los Estados miembros de la OEA se habían dado sólidos argumentos para defenderla conjuntamente.
Los fundamentales son el compromiso por parte de todos los Estados americanos de aceptar estas modalidades por las cuales otros Estados pueden actuar para promover y inclusive la Secretaría General, para promover y consolidar la democracia en un Estado. Esto ha sido absolutamente pionero. Recién ahora, otros sistemas regionales están incorporando normas similares.
A 2 décadas de su creación, las fortalezas de la Carta son claramente visibles.
Bueno, la Carta Democrática Interamericana yo diría que tiene tres formas de aplicación. Una es la parte, lo que es lo medular de la Carta, que yo siempre he llamado un programa de la República Democrática. Y por lo tanto, ahí el desafío es ver hasta qué punto los países, dentro de un régimen democrático, van cumpliendo los distintos aspectos de la Carta. El segundo aspecto es el que dice en relación con la aplicación de la Carta cuando hay riesgo de ruptura de la democracia. Si bien esto tiene una cierta limitación, porque son los países, los gobiernos tienen que pedir esa actuación, y el desafío más grande es cuando se produce, ya cuando la Asamblea General determina que se ha producido una ruptura de la democracia.
Desde su adopción, la Carta Democrática Interamericana ha sido invocada en al menos 16 oportunidades, haciendo uso de sus funciones preventiva y restaurativa en Venezuela, Bolivia, Perú, Ecuador, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, El Salvador, Haití, entre otros. En todos esos casos, la Carta fue la guía y la referencia para las decisiones de los Estados miembros. Pero el gran éxito de la Carta está en lo que no se ve. La Carta es una nueva expresión de valores y principios democráticos colectivos.
La Carta Democrática es una suerte de constitución política, ética y moral del ejercicio de la democracia en el continente. Es única en el mundo porque no solamente defiende la democracia desde un punto de vista declarativo, sino también establece procedimientos precisos y puntuales para cuando existe alguna ruptura o amenaza al orden democrático, y le da también, tanto a los países miembros como al secretario general, instrumentos valiosos para poder actuar en situaciones de emergencia. Creo que la Carta Democrática, así lo hemos constatado, es una guía de acción para gobierno.
Muchas gracias. Y para despedirnos, vamos a hacer un viaje. ¿Okay? La música es un vehículo transportador. Y van a ver cómo con este vehículo llamado orquestando, ¿okay? Vamos a hacer un viaje a través de un camino al carnaval. Pero tienen que alucinar el camino cuando empieza, cuando recién se forma, y vamos a llegar hacia el carnaval.
mujeres y está haciendo unas recomendaciones de rutas para poder cumplir con el derecho al empoderamiento económico y con el crecimiento económico que requieren nuestras empobrecidas economías en tiempos de COVID.
Esta organización es el guardián regional en defensa de la democracia, la libertad y los derechos humanos. Los países se han comprometido con estos valores a través de instrumentos legales como la Carta Democrática Interamericana, la Convención Americana de Derechos Humanos y todas las demás convenciones interamericanas. Nuestro trabajo es mantener los más altos estándares. Debemos ser objetivos, analizar los hechos, denunciar cuando veamos corrupción, inequidad o amenazas a la libertad. En esos casos no podemos ser neutrales.
More than 100 years since the inauguration of this building, the OAS headquarters, our institution still brings together the peoples of the Americas to address our responsibilities as a partnership of nations. As we look to the future, our work must also focus on the construction of a positive agenda that continues to favorably impact millions of lives every day.
The COVID-19 pandemic brought unprecedented challenges to our member states and the people we serve. In response, the OAS Secretariat for Integral Development adopted a three-pronged approach by 1. Adjusting our portfolio of existing projects, 2. Exploring new projects to meet emerging needs, and 3. Expanding multi-sectoral partnerships. The results achieved in 2020 demonstrate the resilience of our member states and the commitment of the OAS SETI to work with member states and partners towards our common goals in the development of our region. Our Network on Competitiveness launched the COVID-19 Ideas Accelerator, sharing 250 tools, health solutions, responses, and recovery plans. The Network for Labor Administration published a portfolio of responses from ministries of labor to COVID-19, sharing over 420 measures taken to protect workers, employment, and income. Likewise, the Inter-American Teacher Education Network series, Teaching STEM in Quarantine, provided 117,000 teachers with key tools to continue advancing STEM education during the pandemic. Through its network and platforms, the Inter-American Committee on Ports promoted international and national best practices, guidelines, protocols, and recommendations on COVID-19 safety measures and continuity of logistic operations. Initiatives such as the Education in Times of Change platform allowed us to meet urgent needs by offering timely tools on virtual education and a dedicated space for ministries to share strategies, actions, and solutions. Other programs such as the Rural Fund stepped up, providing emergency grants to offset the challenges imposed on our students by the pandemic. SETI's partnerships are adding value to member states in the form of technical assistance, training, and access to tools and services. In partnership with leading private sector institutions, we offered micro, small, and medium enterprises access to online tools and training, increasing their visibility and participation in e-commerce, a key to their survival and growth in the pandemic and post-pandemic era. A new OAS SETI Facebook initiative provided 85,000 MSMEs across the region with capacity building opportunities and WhatsApp business tools to aid response, recovery, and resilience building. The Caribbean Small Business Development Center's program achieved real impact, supporting new businesses, expanding sales, and driving growth. A new network of Caribbean SPDCs will broaden the program's reach. The Inter-American Committee on Tourism, the C2, convened ministerial-level policy dialogue in an urgent response to the impact of the pandemic on the hard-hit tourism and hospitality sectors. Policymakers and experts discussed biosanitary protocols, travel and visa facilitation, among other critical areas for the sector's recovery. Partnering with the George Washington University and the U.S. Bureau of Indian Affairs, we went ahead with the scheduled first Indigenous Tourism Forum of the Americas, pivoting to a virtual format and convening over 240 participants from indigenous communities, the private sector, and governments. SETI also integrated sustainable development practices in the COVID-19 response. The pandemic is a daily reminder of the links between water, health, sanitation, food security, and nutrition. We ensured the continuity of our water management projects in the Plata Basin and worked with governments and partners in the design of an investment portfolio valued at $90 million. Additionally, the Energy and Climate Partnership of the Americas continued to share relevant best practices and responses to the pandemic on energy and air quality. These few examples indicate our collective impact. We cannot do this alone. It is now more urgent than ever to address the region's structural weaknesses, to recover from the health, economic, and social crises occasioned by the pandemic and prepare for future shocks. It is imperative that we work together as we risk losing recent development gains and seeing millions fall back into poverty. It is time for the region to redirect course and pursue a more sustainable, resilient, and equitable future for all. We are in this together.
But the resilience building agenda is too big for any one stakeholder to address acting alone, and simply bringing together stakeholders, whether at the national, subnational, regional, or global level, is not enough. Effective, focused, and sustained coordination among stakeholders is paramount to provide countries with integrated and comprehensive support.
The OAS, as a hemispheric forum and honest broker, must continue to facilitate this process while we work with member states towards the attainment of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. Cooperation, collaboration, and partnerships that include all actors strengthen us, enabling us to be more than the sum of our parts. We can and we must work together. The future of our region depends on it.
On September 11, 2001, in Lima, Peru, the OAS General Assembly adopted, with the unanimous vote of its member states, the Inter-American Democratic Charter. This resolution was the result of a request that the Summit of the Americas, meeting in April of that year in Quebec, made to the regional organization. This charter is the final link in a pioneering development of the Inter-American system since the adoption in Bogota in 1948 of the charter by which the Organization of American States was established. The context surrounding its adoption was very different from that of previous decades.
The decade of the 90s was unique for the hemisphere. In South America, military regimes realized that modern societies were too complicated to be ruled with bayonets. In Central America, the Cold War, the proxy war between the United States and the Soviet bloc had worn itself out, and there was a sense that the only solution was not military, but political and democratic.
The Democratic Charter took advantage of this moment to define that representative democracy is the sum of many elements that comprise it, and it lists the essential ones among them: respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms, access to power and its exercise subject to the rule of law, the holding of free, periodic, and fair elections, the pluralistic system of political parties and organizations, and the separation and independence of the branches of government. But that was not enough.
En muchos de los países de América del Sur, los países de América Central también estaban terminando largos periodos dictatoriales, generalmente
Thank you. Hello. Ernest. ¿Me escuchas? En piso. Va. Percy, ¿me pagan la música, por favor?
Ahora está en la batería.
Gracias. Probando. Ahí me escuchas, Ernest. Ok.
Aseguremos que
sí, déjame ver. Bueno, intérpretes, si me escuchan, por favor, vamos a hacer una pequeña prueba. Sí. ¿Me escuchan, intérpretes? 1, 2, 3, piso, probando. Si me escuchan los intérpretes, por favor. Si podemos hacer una pequeña prueba de interpretación. Cada uno diga el idioma de su cabina, por favor. En los canales. Si pueden encender los 4 canales, por favor, y empezar a decir el nombre del idioma. Los intérpretes, sí, esos son los intérpretes. Ya. Probando.
Testing, English booth. Yes. Yes. This is the English booth. This is the English booth. Testing. Testing. Cabina de inglés. English booth. Yes. Yes, yes, we can hear you. Yes. Testing, English booth. Testing, English booth. Good morning. This is the English booth.
Somos la mitad de mujeres y la mitad de hombres, así debe ser el espejo de la representación.
A successful past and a vibrant present do not, however, mean an assured future. Prolonging the validity of the Charter in the future is everyone's job.
El mejor funcionamiento democrático implica democracias más eficientes. Si vamos en el camino de la Carta Democrática Interamericana, si todos nuestros países fueran en el camino de la Carta Democrática Interamericana, estaríamos definitivamente en el más pleno ejercicio de mejores democracias, de instituciones más fuertes y más eficientes. Para mí es esta Constitución de las Américas, hay que preservarla, hay que fortalecerla, hay que hacerla vigente en los hechos, en las acciones, en el compromiso de los países. Los contenidos están muy bien, son perfectos, son los justos, son los que corresponden a los estados de derecho democráticos que deben tener la región. Es el deber ser. Entonces es nuestro compromiso el de hacerla funcionar de la mejor forma y hacia eso debemos ir.
Bueno, la CIM tiene una agenda enorme en el tema de democracia y de liderazgos. El primer ámbito tiene que ver con la gobernanza electoral, para que esta gobernanza electoral responda a las necesidades con las que fue creada, y es buscar los espacios de redistribución del poder. Después hay un programa interamericano sobre el liderazgo de las mujeres, donde generamos conocimiento y también tenemos cursos de capacitación. Hay un poderoso curso que ha llegado a más de 1000 mujeres con más de 15 ediciones, que es para candidatas electorales, en las cuales conversamos con ellas, pero también nos ponemos en una agenda de solidaridad y articulación y alianzas entre las mujeres, a pesar de las múltiples diferencias ideológicas o de partidos políticos. También hablamos de los temas de violencia política, porque no es lo mismo llegar que quedarse, y la violencia política es una forma de ejercicio de disciplinar a las mujeres para que vuelvan al mundo de lo privado y enfrentar la violencia, hacer buenas investigaciones, buenas leyes que permitan sancionar la violencia política. Es parte de las aspiraciones de la CIM en este programa de liderazgo de las mujeres. La aspiración histórica de las mujeres es estar en el mundo del público, que nuestro trabajo sea remunerado y que tenga un reconocimiento. COVID ha puesto en evidencia una profundización de las brechas existentes para el logro de este objetivo. Estas brechas existentes ahora dan cuenta de que podríamos tener un rezago de más de 2 décadas en el mundo laboral, que el cierre de brechas que se previó que podía tardar 100 años en cerrarse, ahora se habla de 135 años para cerrar la brecha entre los hombres y las mujeres. Entonces nuestro objetivo es que miren el derecho de las mujeres al empoderamiento económico, que el statement quédate en casa, que es un viejo conocido del patriarcado, no sea que nos quedemos en casa siempre, y que entendamos que la inserción de la mitad de la población, de este talento humano que tiene una serie de ventajas competitivas, es necesario para el crecimiento económico. De manera que la CIM está colocando esta realidad, está colocando las necesidades de las mujeres y está haciendo unas recomendaciones de rutas para poder cumplir con el derecho al empoderamiento económico y con el crecimiento económico que requieren nuestras empobrecidas economías en tiempos de COVID.
Esta organización es el guardián regional en defensa de la democracia, la libertad y los derechos humanos. Los países se han comprometido con estos valores a través de instrumentos legales como la Carta Democrática Interamericana, la Convención Americana de Derechos Humanos y todas las demás convenciones interamericanas. Nuestro trabajo es mantener los más altos estándares. Debemos ser objetivos, analizar los hechos, denunciar cuando veamos corrupción, inequidad o amenazas a la libertad. En esos casos no podemos ser neutrales.
than 100 years since the inauguration of this building, the OAS headquarters, our institution still brings together the peoples of the Americas to address our responsibilities as a partnership of nations. As we look to the future, our work must also focus on the construction of a positive agenda that continues to favorably impact millions of lives every day.
The COVID-19 pandemic brought unprecedented challenges to all member states and the people we serve. In response, the OAS Secretariat for Integral Development adopted a three-pronged approach by 1. Adjusting our portfolio of existing projects, 2. Exploring new projects to meet emerging needs, and 3. Expanding multi-sectoral partnerships. The results achieved in 2020 demonstrate the resilience of our member states and the commitment of the OAS SETI to work with member states and partners towards our common goals in the development of our region. Our Network on Competitiveness launched the COVID-19 Ideas Accelerator, sharing 250 tools, health solutions, responses, and recovery plans. The Network for Labor Administration published a portfolio of responses from ministries of labor to COVID-19, sharing over 420 measures taken to protect workers, employment, and income. Likewise, the Inter-American Teacher Education Network series, Teaching STEM in Quarantine, provided 117,000 teachers with key tools to continue advancing STEM education during the pandemic. Through its network and platforms, the Inter-American Committee on Ports promoted international and national best practices, guidelines, protocols, and recommendations on COVID-19 safety measures and continuity of logistic operations. Initiatives such as the Education in Times of Change platform allowed us to meet urgent needs by offering timely tools on virtual education and a dedicated space for ministries to share strategies, actions, and solutions. Other programs such as the Road Fund stepped up, providing emergency grants to offset the challenges imposed on our students by the pandemic. SETI's partnerships are adding value to member states in the form of technical assistance, training, and access to tools and services. In partnership with leading private sector institutions, we offered micro, small, and medium enterprises access to online tools and training, increasing their visibility and participation in e-commerce, a key to their survival and growth in the pandemic and post-pandemic era. A new OAS SETI Facebook initiative provided 85,000 MSMEs across the region with capacity building opportunities and WhatsApp business tools to aid response, recovery, and resilience building. The Caribbean Small Business Development Centers program achieved real impact, supporting new businesses, expanding sales, and driving growth. A new network of Caribbean SPDCs will broaden the program's reach. The Inter-American Committee on Tourism, the CTOUR, convened ministerial-level policy dialogue in an urgent response to the impact of the pandemic on the hard-hit tourism and hospitality sectors. Policymakers and experts discussed biosanitary protocols, travel and visa facilitation, among other critical areas for the sector's recovery. Partnering with the George Washington University and the U.S. Bureau of Indian Affairs, we went ahead with the scheduled first Indigenous Tourism Forum of the Americas, pivoting to a virtual format and convening over 240 participants from indigenous communities, the private sector, and governments. SETI also integrated sustainable development practices in the COVID-19 response. The pandemic is a daily reminder of the links between water, health, sanitation, food security, and nutrition. We ensured the continuity of our water management projects in the Plata Basin and worked with governments and partners in the design of an investment portfolio valued at $90 million. Additionally, the Energy and Climate Partnership of the Americas continued to share relevant best practices and responses to the pandemic on energy and air quality. These few examples indicate our collective impact. We cannot do this alone. It is now more urgent than ever to address the region's structural weaknesses, to recover from the health, economic, and social crises occasioned by the pandemic and prepare for future shocks. It is imperative that we work together as we risk losing recent development gains and seeing millions fall back into poverty. It is time for the region to redirect course and pursue a more sustainable, resilient, and equitable future for all. We are in this together.
But the resilience building agenda is too big for any one stakeholder to address acting alone, and simply bringing together stakeholders, whether at the national, subnational, regional, or global level, is not enough. Effective, focused, and sustained coordination among stakeholders is paramount to provide countries with integrated and comprehensive support.
The OAS, as a hemispheric forum and honest broker, must continue to facilitate this process while we work with member states towards the attainment of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. Cooperation, collaboration, and partnerships that include all actors strengthen us, enabling us to be more than the sum of our parts. We can and we must work together. The future of our region depends on it.
El 11 de septiembre de 2001, la Asamblea General de la OEA adoptó en Lima, por unanimidad de todos sus Estados miembros, la Carta Democrática Interamericana. Esta resolución fue resultado de una solicitud que la Cumbre de las Américas, reunida en abril de ese año en Quebec, le hiciera a la organización regional. Esta carta es el último eslabón de un desarrollo pionero del sistema interamericano desde la adopción en Bogotá en 1948 de la carta por la que se constituyó la Organización de los Estados Americanos, OEA. El contexto era muy diferente del de décadas anteriores.
The decade of the 90s was unique for the hemisphere. In South America, military regimes realized that modern societies were too complicated to be ruled with bayonets. In Central America, the Cold War, the proxy war between the United States and the Soviet bloc had worn itself out, and there was a sense that the only solution was not military, but political and democratic.
La Carta Democrática aprovecha ese momento para definir que la democracia representativa es la suma de muchos elementos que la integran y enumera los esenciales, entre ellos el respeto a los derechos humanos y las libertades fundamentales, el acceso al poder y su ejercicio con sujeción al Estado de Derecho, la celebración de elecciones libres, periódicas y transparentes, el régimen plural de partidos y organizaciones políticas y la separación e independencia de los poderes públicos. Pero ello no bastaba.
En muchos de los países de América del Sur, los países de América Central también estaban terminando largos periodos dictatoriales, generalmente terminados además en conflictos, guerras civiles muy dolorosas. Entonces, el primer trabajo en el marco de la OEA es: no queremos más los golpes militares. Ese fue el primer entorno, y sobre eso hubo un consenso a principios de los 90. Pero luego se fueron produciendo estas nuevas modalidades de alteración, y ahí se genera un nuevo consenso en la región. Tampoco queremos estas nuevas modalidades de alteración del orden constitucional.
Esas nuevas modalidades tenían una forma específica. Gobiernos legítimamente electos eran los que subvertían la democracia. Así, la Carta contempló mecanismos para afrontar el caso de una amenaza, una alteración grave o incluso una ruptura del orden democrático.
La defensa interamericana de la democracia es el concepto fundamental. También lo es la democracia como derecho de los pueblos de las Américas. Esos son los dos puntos en los cuales la Carta Democrática Interamericana introduce también fuertes innovaciones en cuanto a que no solamente es una responsabilidad de cada país defender la democracia en el hemisferio, sino que son todos los países responsables de la defensa de la democracia en el hemisferio y la Secretaría General.
En los mismos instantes en que en Lima se aprobaba la Carta, el mundo se convulsionaba por los atentados en Nueva York y Washington. Al día siguiente, el mundo ya no sería igual. Gracias a la Carta, tampoco lo sería la manera en la que las Américas protegían la democracia. Los Estados miembros de la OEA se habían dado sólidos argumentos para defenderla conjuntamente.
Los fundamentales son el compromiso por parte de todos los estados americanos de aceptar estas modalidades por las cuales otros estados pueden actuar para promover y inclusive la Secretaría General, para promover y consolidar la democracia en un estado. Esto ha sido absolutamente pionero. Recién ahora, otros sistemas regionales están incorporando normas similares.
A 2 décadas de su creación, las fortalezas de la Carta son claramente visibles.
Bueno, la Carta Democrática Interamericana yo diría que tiene tres formas de aplicación. Una es la parte, lo que es lo medular de la Carta, que yo siempre he llamado un programa de la República Democrática. Y por lo tanto, ahí el desafío es ver hasta qué punto los países, dentro de un régimen democrático, van cumpliendo los distintos aspectos de la Carta. El segundo aspecto es el que dice en relación con la aplicación de la Carta cuando hay riesgo de ruptura de la democracia. Esto tiene una cierta limitación porque son los países, los gobiernos tienen que pedir esa actuación. Y el desafío más grande es cuando se produce, ya cuando la Asamblea General determina que se ha producido una ruptura de la democracia.
Desde su adopción, la Carta Democrática Interamericana ha sido invocada en al menos 16 oportunidades, haciendo uso de sus funciones preventiva y restaurativa en Venezuela, Bolivia, Perú, Ecuador, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, El Salvador, Haití, entre otros. En todos esos casos, la Carta fue la guía y la referencia para las decisiones de los Estados miembros, pero el gran éxito de la Carta está en lo que no se ve. La Carta es una nueva expresión de valores y principios democráticos colectivos.
La Carta Democrática es una suerte de constitución política, ética y moral del ejercicio de la democracia en el continente. Es única en el mundo porque no solamente defiende la democracia desde un punto de vista declarativo, sino también establece procedimientos precisos y puntuales para cuando existe alguna ruptura o amenaza al orden democrático, y le da también, tanto a los países miembros como al secretario general, instrumentos valiosos para poder actuar en situaciones de emergencia. Creo que la Carta Democrática, así lo hemos constatado, es una guía de acción para gobiernos, para ciudadanos, para partidos políticos, para empresarios, para todas las organizaciones de la sociedad civil, de cuál es la aspiración democrática en la que estamos todos inscritos.
La vigencia de la Carta va sin duda de la mano de la vigencia de la democracia, que es esencialmente un trabajo en permanente construcción.
Democracias perfectas todavía no las hay. Tenemos democracias perfectibles o muy perfectibles, pero sí la Carta Democrática Interamericana ha sido una referencia fundamental de nuestros países, de actuar en consonancia con la misma, de no apartarse de la misma, o de que cuando se apartan de la misma existen mecanismos de sanciones y de acciones del sistema interamericano para volver a encauzar los mismos a la vía democrática. Es un trabajo permanente, es un trabajo continuo y es un trabajo que siempre sufre retrocesos en ese proceso.
La democracia no ha ido mucho más allá de lo que era hace 10 años atrás, pero tampoco ha retrocedido tan sustantivamente en la región. Existen en ella grandes posibilidades democráticas y grandes desafíos. Desde el punto de vista de la génesis de los gobiernos, todavía las cosas están razonablemente bien, y desde el punto de vista de la caída de gobiernos tampoco han habido demasiadas situaciones así. Efectivamente hay algunos problemas de derechos humanos y de democracia no resueltos, pero yo creo que en general la Carta Democrática Interamericana sigue vigente.
Que la Carta está viva lo demuestra su adaptabilidad a las nuevas exigencias, como la de la igualdad de género.
La Carta Democrática Interamericana es un instrumento poderoso. Es un acuerdo entre los estados que le da una ruta sobre los conceptos de democracia y que lo liga a un apellido poderoso que es la representatividad. Y justamente este concepto de representatividad de la Carta Democrática nos permite colocar esta reflexión feminista en términos de una democracia paritaria que nos permita accesar a los espacios y estar representadas en la misma dimensión que la población está constituida. Si somos la mitad de mujeres y la mitad de hombres, así debe ser el espejo de la representación.
Un pasado exitoso y un presente vibrante no significan, sin embargo, un futuro asegurado. Prolongar la vigencia de la Carta en el futuro es obra de todas y todos.
El mejor funcionamiento democrático implica democracias más eficientes. Si vamos en el camino de la Carta Democrática Interamericana, si todos nuestros países fueran en el camino de la Carta Democrática Interamericana, estaríamos definitivamente en el más pleno ejercicio de mejores democracias, de instituciones más fuertes y más eficientes. Para mí es esta Constitución de las Américas, hay que preservarla, hay que fortalecerla, hay que hacerla vigente en los hechos, en las acciones, en el compromiso de los países. Los contenidos están muy bien, son perfectos, son los justos, son los que corresponden a los estados de derecho democráticos que deben tener la región. Es el deber ser. Entonces es nuestro compromiso el de hacerla funcionar de la mejor forma y hacia eso debemos ir.
Bueno, la CIM tiene una agenda enorme en el tema de democracia y de liderazgos. El primer ámbito tiene que ver con la gobernanza electoral, para que esta gobernanza electoral responda a las necesidades con las que fue creada, y es buscar los espacios de redistribución del poder. Después hay un programa interamericano sobre el liderazgo de las mujeres, donde generamos conocimiento y también tenemos cursos de capacitación. Hay un poderoso curso que ha llegado a más de 1000 mujeres con más de 15 ediciones, que es para candidatas electorales, en las cuales conversamos con ellas, pero también nos ponemos en una agenda de solidaridad y articulación y alianzas entre las mujeres, a pesar de las múltiples diferencias ideológicas o de partidos políticos. También hablamos de los temas de violencia política, porque no es lo mismo llegar que quedarse, y la violencia política es una forma de ejercicio de disciplinar a las mujeres para que vuelvan al mundo de lo privado y enfrentar la violencia, hacer buenas investigaciones, buenas leyes que permitan sancionar la violencia política. Es parte de las aspiraciones de la CIM en este programa de liderazgo de las mujeres. La aspiración histórica de las mujeres es estar en el mundo de lo público, que nuestro trabajo sea remunerado y que tenga un reconocimiento. COVID ha puesto en evidencia una profundización de las brechas existentes para el logro de este objetivo. Estas brechas existentes ahora dan cuenta de que podríamos tener un rezago de más de 2 décadas en el mundo laboral, que el cierre de brechas que se previó que podía tardar 100 años en cerrarse, ahora se habla de 135 años para cerrar la brecha entre los hombres y las mujeres. Entonces, nuestro objetivo es que miren el derecho de las mujeres al empoderamiento económico, que el statement "quédate en casa", que es un viejo conocido del patriarcado, no sea que nos quedemos en casa siempre, y que entendamos que la inserción de la mitad de la población, de este talento humano que tiene una serie de ventajas competitivas, es necesario para el crecimiento económico. De manera que la CIM está colocando esta realidad, está colocando las necesidades de las mujeres y está haciendo unas recomendaciones de rutas para poder cumplir con el derecho al empoderamiento económico y con el crecimiento económico que requieren nuestras empobrecidas economías en tiempos de COVID.
But everyone has agreed to start with this session this morning. I have a few words to say at the outset before turning it over to the Secretary General and then starting our session. So I want to welcome everyone, first and foremost, to the Summit Implementation Review Group Ministerial. And I'd very much like to thank our Vice Chair, Foreign Minister Landa, for his partnership, and, of course, Secretary General Almagro for his leadership. I'm grateful to the representatives here of the Joint Summit Working Group for their efforts to actually turn our commitments into action. In June, we met in Los Angeles for the 9th Summit of the Americas. There, we adopted 5 core commitments to address big challenges facing our people, challenges that none of our countries can effectively address alone. We arrived at these commitments following months of consultation between our governments, as well as engagement with civil society with youth leaders, with the private sector. First, we pledge to strengthen public health systems across the Americas, working alongside partners like civil society representatives, researchers, business leaders. We're focused on expanding access to quality, equitable health services, strengthening systems so that we can address challenges we face today and better detect and prevent future health emergencies. Second, we committed to the first regional agenda for digital transformation, improving access to the internet and other digital tools, especially for historically marginalized communities. That includes promoting digital literacy, privacy, and cybersecurity, and also accelerating the digital transformation of government services and using technology to make government more transparent. Third, we committed to accelerate the clean energy transition by cutting emissions and expanding renewable energy. We also pledged to help develop a responsible mining sector and strengthen the regional mineral supply chains that are vital to powering clean energy technologies. Fourth, we resolved to invest more in climate resilience to help our communities adapt to the growing effects of climate change, from climate-smart agriculture to sustainable fishing, and to improve disaster preparedness and response. We'll also help communities recover from droughts, from floods, and storms. Finally, we endorsed the Inter-American Action Plan on Democratic Governance, committing to promote and protect human rights, the rule of law, and greater social inclusion. We agreed to bolster transparent and accountable governance and combat threats to democracy from corruption and disinformation. The point of this morning's gathering is for us to report on the progress we've made toward realizing these 5 core commitments, to see where we can do more together, and to make actual plans for doing so. That's how we hold ourselves accountable and actually turn our pledges into action. In a moment, I'll suggest a calendar and working procedures for the coming year. The calendar sets out a schedule for developing action plans, convening subject matter experts, and reporting on our progress over the next year. The working procedures address logistics and outline the different roles and responsibilities for this group so that we can collaborate efficiently and effectively. But first, let me quickly share some of what the United States has done since we last met. For example, we're working toward a pledge we made in support of the first commitment, strengthening health systems in the region. In June, we announced that we'd join the Pan American Health Organization to train 500,000 public health professionals in the region over the next 5 years. That will dramatically increase access to health care for millions who don't have it and raise the quality of care for those who do. Last week, our Secretary of Health and Human Services, Javier Becerra, hosted a meeting with his counterparts from across the region to develop an implementation plan so that we can help meet the needs of countries throughout our hemisphere. We're also making progress toward the 3rd and 4th commitments, expanding clean energy and adapting to climate change. In the last few months, we began to implement PAC 2030, the U.S.-Caribbean partnership to address the climate crisis, by teaming up with Caribbean partners and technical experts to create action plans on energy security, climate-smart technology, and global food security. Last month, Vice President Harris met with Caribbean leaders in Washington to review our progress. And we're working toward our 5th commitment, strengthening democracy, by investing in civil society. So far, we provided almost $2 million to Red Lat, the Latin American and Caribbean Network for Democracy, to support civic engagement, including by helping civil society monitor countries' implementation of their summit commitments. Every one of these efforts is collaborative. Everyone is reaching across borders and across sectors, because the challenges we face are too big for any of our countries, governments, or people to solve alone. So it's critical that we continue to strengthen and expand these partnerships, and not just with federal governments, but also with mayors, with community leaders, with NGOs, with the private sector, with regional organizations. That's why the United States is hosting the first ever Cities Summit of the Americas in Denver next April. We'll bring together people from across the hemisphere, municipal and community leaders, entrepreneurs and academics, and indigenous and underrepresented groups, and we'll find ways to build on our summit commitments at the local level to make progress on the issues that matter most in our communities. As we move forward, we'll also lay the groundwork for the 10th Summit of the Americas, Foreign Minister Alvarez has recently informed us of the offer by the Dominican Republic to host that summit. The United States fully supports this offer. These are early days for our common effort, but we've already made concrete progress to implement the ambitious commitments that our leaders agreed to in Los Angeles. Now we just need to keep up the momentum. I very much look forward to hearing from colleagues about the areas where we're making progress, today as well as in our future meetings. And I look forward to discussing where we need to do more to build a strong, stable, prosperous, and resilient hemisphere for all of our people. With that, let me turn it over to Secretary General Almagro. Luis.
On behalf of the General Secretariat of the OAS and Technical Secretariat and institutional memory of the summit process, the JSWG offers or welcomes you to this meeting to look at the implementation of the summit as we celebrate the 52nd General Assembly of the OAS. Mr. Chairman, delegates, colleagues, 3 months ago we met in Los Angeles on the occasion of the 9th summit, in which we spoke of a host of urgent challenges faced by the hemisphere, and we took actions accordingly. 5 different political commitments by heads of state and government that were adopted. Now, today, on the occasion of the General Assembly of the Organization of American States, under the motto of Together Against Discrimination and Inequality, we thank the U.S. for its leadership in carrying out heading up a productive dialogue that led to the successful carrying out of the summit. Despite the different perspectives that exist throughout the region, the 9th summit was an opportunity for leaders of the hemisphere to reach a shared commitment. It is key within this context for us to continue progressing along those guidelines in a constructive way, so that citizens of the hemisphere expect the political commitments and mandates adopted give us a framework for us to address the most pressing issues in the hemisphere and to adopt a host of public policies. These commitments include the need to strengthen the healthcare systems, to establish a regional digital transformation agenda, climate change matters, and to address the needs of energy transition, and to protect our ecosystems and to respond to growing threats to democracy, with special emphasis on the most vulnerable populations that have been historically sidelined, given its importance for all the countries of the region. We also underscore the initiatives announced by the chair during the 9th summit, such as the LA Declaration on Immigration and Protection and Alliance or Partnership for Prosperity of the Americas, and the partnership of the U.S. and the Caribbean to 2030 for the climate change response. Now, this all calls for political will and decision on the part of each government to work on building a focus that addresses deep social chasms that have only broadened during the pandemic. At the OAS, based on our 4 pillars, democracy, human rights, sustainable development, multidimensional security, it falls to us to foster cooperation between the countries of the hemisphere with special focus on reducing vulnerabilities, capacity building, reducing the latent inequity that marks our hemisphere. And the 5 different areas that we've negotiated led to action plans that we agreed to for digital transformation, democratic governance, and the OAS has acknowledged technical wherewithal to do this and to offer support and coordination in the implementation phase. To achieve these goals will call for much determination by the countries in transforming their public policies. To this effect, the full cooperation of the international community is very important, especially to bring to bear financial wherewithal for us to do so. We celebrate the reconvening of the Joint Summits Working Group on the 9th Summit and to tackle together these challenges through coordination and collaboration, ever strengthened for us to contribute to a sustainable, resilient, and equitable future. This is an opportunity for us to seek out a greater convergence of our agendas, enabling us to address the multiple needs in the region. As we will see during this General Assembly, and as we saw at the last summit, the region needs to redouble its efforts to move toward greater inclusion, equity, and more rights. The path ahead should lead to concrete actions by states, and my invitation is for us to continue working towards these goals. We reiterate the summit's Secretariat's commitment to undertake the substantive matters that are necessary to this end and to follow through on the implementation of the 9th Summit and to continue strengthening participation and coordination of the JSWG and civil society and social actors in the inter-American ministerial processes as an integral part of this process. I wish for this meeting much success. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Secretary General, I would now ask our colleagues from the media to depart. We'll give you a moment to do so. Thank you. All right. We're going to come to the adoption of the working procedures, but before we do, I see that a couple of colleagues have asked to be recognized, and let me start with our colleague from Costa Rica, Roberto.
Costa Rica is pleased to see the results obtained during the 9th Summit of the Americas. And we express thanks for the work carried out by the United States in its capacity as host and coordinator, as well as by the Summit Secretariat team. The time has come now for it to transform into actions those political commitments that we took on. And you can count on Costa Rica to do its part, just as we did in the process of adopting these documents. Our country will be present for the implementation of the mandates to build a sustainable, resilient, and equitable future, which was the motto of the 9th Summit, and to respond concretely to the most pressing needs of the hemisphere. The matters addressed during the summit are key in our own social and economic recovery process, with a view toward achieving inclusive and resilient development based on green and sustainable actions rooted in technology and innovation. We underscore particularly the importance of democratic governance that is robust to strengthen institutions and to fight corruption and to ensure respect for human rights. We therefore think it's important for us to continue forging ahead along these lines. Mr. Chairman, Costa Rica stands firm in its commitment to foster these avenues of exchange, and we also thank all of the delegations for your valuable contributions, and we reiterate our intention to follow through with the commitment of these mandates. Thank you.
Arnaldo, thank you very much. And I've already failed in my responsibilities as chair by actually having you jump the queue, but I'm very pleased to have done that. And in fact, I wanted to go to the Dominican Republic. And I'm looking out to see. Straight ahead. There you are. Please, Robert.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Distinguished ministers of foreign affairs, heads of delegation, on behalf of the President Luis Abinader of the government and the government of the Dominican Republic and its people, we are grateful for your having accepted the Dominican Republic to host the 10th Summit of the Americas during at this meeting of the Joint Summit Working Group session, or surge rather. We recognize the United States for kicking off the summit process and for having kept it alive over time. We will continue collaborating closely with the United States to comply with the commitments that we took on at the 9th Summit. The Dominican Republic is committed to multilateralism and is fully convinced of the important opportunities that international venues offer us. This has crystallized in our performance, and we have accumulated sufficient experience for us now to take on an event of such magnitude. We have hosted other summits, assemblies, ministerial and sectoral meetings, and I would just underscore some of them, the most important. The second summit of the Organization of African, Caribbean, Pacific Caribbean States of 1999, the 12th Ibero-American Summit in 2002, the General Assemblies of the Organization of American States in 2006 and 16, and the 5th Summit of Heads of State of the Community of Latin American Caribbean States, CELAC, in 2017. Currently, we hold the pro-temporary chairmanship of the Central American Integration System, CICA, as well as the Ibero-American Conference, whose summit shall be held in the Dominican Republic next March. For our country, it's an honor for us to take on the responsibility of organizing the 10th Summit of the Americas, for which, as always, we will put our best foot forward to carry it out at the highest level and in an inclusive way. We pledge to work closely with all of the countries to carry out at this summit to address the most pressing issues to our hemisphere and to achieve the best possible results. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Roberto, and thank you for the offer of the Dominican Republic to host us for the 10th Summit, something that we very much welcome. We have a number of people who've asked to be recognized. I'd like to go to our host for today, for all of today, including our co-host for this meeting, to Foreign Minister Landa. Cesar, over to you. And then, if it's all right, we have some business to take care of before turning back to anyone who wishes to speak. But Cesar, over to you.
Thank you. Muchas gracias. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, esteemed colleagues. I would like to reiterate a warm welcome by Peru to this second ministerial meeting of the Summit Implementation Review Group. We trust that the climate that we enjoyed yesterday will persist over the next couple of days. We are grateful for the presentation made by Secretary of State Anthony Blinken about the results of the 9th Summit of the Americas, as well as the tentative calendar moving forward. My country is happy to see that this is aligned with the necessary implementation of the political commitments and plans of actions adopted in Los Angeles. This is a matter of following through with these responsibilities and these commitments, carrying them to fruition or action through quarterly meetings and through ad hoc technical groups. This will be very helpful. Now, regarding and on democratic governance, that is at its implementation stage. That is, the follow-up mechanism to be implemented needs to be in line with that which was put together for democratic governance in the Lima Commitment Against Corruption of 2018. My country will continue working hard with the General Secretariat of the Organization of American States to apply the software of the follow-up mechanism to optimize its operation, and this hopefully will come to be something that all the countries of the hemisphere will take ownership over, and also to work forward on plans of action on health and resilience, or health resilience in the Americas, whose declaration in Peru, along with Uruguay, Peru and Uruguay pledged to facilitate this process. It's something we cannot put off anymore as we saw over the last couple of years of pandemic. And we're very pleased to see that these processes are also being supported in a parallel way by the private sector, civil society, area experts, and by youth, whose recommendations and initiatives are always very rich in substance and quite original. You can count on Peru's support to foster and carry out our implementation efforts in the most conducive way possible, technically and politically. And we also congratulate the Dominican Republic for hosting the next Summit of the Americas. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cesar. What I'd like to do now is take care of some business, and then we can continue with anyone who wishes to speak. So what I'd like to do is to move to consideration of the Summit Implementation Review Group's notional calendar, as well as the working procedures for next year, as we continue to fulfill the promise that our leaders made in Los Angeles. This calendar is and will remain a living document, and we can expect our national coordinators to revise it and update it as circumstances warrant within the parameters that we're establishing here today. As discussed at the last regular meeting of the Surge, the chair should convene subject matter experts from summit governments so that we might work together to implement our summit mandates. The Surge will play a facilitating role, supporting government experts as they negotiate the action plan on health and resilience in the Americas. The chair would convene technical groups with other experts to coordinate joint efforts and monitor implementation of our commitments on democratic governance, on digital transformation, on sustainable green future, and accelerating the clean energy transition. Throughout this process, we will consult with civil society, with the private sector, with youth stakeholders, to ensure our efforts deliver results to the people of our hemisphere. So the question before us is whether we can consider the Surge notional calendar and working procedures approved. Without any objections, the notional calendar and working procedures are approved. Now, turning back to the floor, anyone wishing to be recognized, please let us know. But I see our colleague from Paraguay would like to be recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken and distinguished foreign ministers, Secretary General, I would like to start by underscoring how successful the 9th Summit of the Americas was, in which we adopted 5 political commitments on far-reaching areas for the development and well-being of our countries. These commitments that we reached through intense negotiations with broad participation reflect many of the responses that our hemisphere needs. Taking into account the global context and the attendant uncertainties that undermine peaceful coexistence among nations. And so it's very important for us to establish the calendar which you, Mr. Chairman, just addressed and we have just approved, and this calendar of technical meetings for the implementation process. So we thank the U.S. delegate for its proposal, and we see this as a good move forward toward our commitment, and we support the document presented by the chair. Please allow me to reiterate my country's commitment to seek out collective solutions to the multiple challenges our societies face. Hemispheric cooperation is key, as is our willingness to proactively collaborate, and we are firm in that commitment, and Paraguay will continue to follow through and accompany the summit process, because we believe that it's very important to build a political consensus around crucial issues to our development and security, with a view toward always defending democracy and protecting human rights. Thank you.
Julio, thank you very much. I now recognize the representative from El Salvador.
I believe Uruguay was ahead of me, Mr. Chair.
Our colleague from Uruguay. And then
Gracias.
over to El Salvador.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Chair, Mr. Secretary General. To the heads of delegation and ministers of foreign affairs, ladies and gentlemen, it is for Uruguay as well as for me of particular satisfaction that we are meeting once again within the framework of the work of the Summit Implementation Review Group on this occasion. It is timely that we note the regular sessions that we have had as of late, and since the 9th Summit of the Americas held in the city of Los Angeles, we seem to be able to work now with renewed vigor. This calendar that we have just approved is one more testament to that. All of the issues that are part of the summit's process agenda, to a greater or lesser degree, all call on us to continue working and to work to implement various public policies on behalf of our countries in the region. We also understand that it is salutary that many countries are able to participate in the summit's process and the dynamic of our meetings, and in improving the negotiation of documents that are in the end approved at the highest level. Uruguay, over the course of this current half year, are heading as presidents pro tempore of the Mercosur, and in the political consultation role, Uruguay is proposing 4 thematic areas of interest related to access to justice and social welfare, security, and the promotion and respect for human rights, with a particular emphasis on gender and violence against women, the prevention of violence against women. In this regard, we see many parallel efforts at Mercosur with the themes of the General Assembly of the Americas, which, following the 9th Summit of the Americas in Los Angeles, has reached consensus on many important issues such as climate change, the economic partnerships, the final initiative presented by President Biden. Everything having to do with health, as we heard from the Foreign Minister of Peru, on which we worked very closely, Uruguay and Peru, and following the lessons learned of this painful pandemic that we've lived through over the course of the last 2 years, we now have established bases for us to work in a preventive fashion, a preventive form of governance with a view to having a capacity to respond and contingency plans in place to face the challenges that may arise. For this reason, we are extremely pleased with the work engaged in and the participation of all countries, all member states who are here, with a focus on democratic governance, pluralism, and freedom and respect for human rights. So felicitations to the appointment, or for the naming of the Dominican Republic as a host of the next Summit of the Americas. Thank you. Thank you.
Back to our friend from El Salvador. Thank you.
Ahora sí. Now it is my turn. Thank you, Secretary Blinken. El Salvador expresses its appreciation to the Summit Secretariat for the work undertaken in hosting the 9th Summit of the Americas earlier this summer. This has allowed us to meet the challenge on a number of issues of great concern to our citizens. Now, it is left to us to work inclusively, with transparency, taking into consideration the different views and situations of member states. We appreciate the report from the presidency of the summit's process, and we agree that we must work in a coordinated and effective way with the joint working group on the summits. Our effectiveness will be measured in terms of health and resiliency, a effective digital transformation, and working to set the foundation for clean energy. And if we consolidate more democratic societies where the will of the majority is respected. Let me express, Mr. Chair, the commitment of my country to support in the implementation with the support and cooperation of all member states. El Salvador appreciates the leadership for the organization and hosting of the 10th Summit of the Americas by the Dominican Republic.
I'd now like to recognize the representative from Suriname.
Thank you very much. Secretary of State, Secretary General Almagro. First of all, thank you very much for convening this meeting so shortly after the Los Angeles Summit. I thank also the Summer Secretariat for the work done so far, and we look forward to continued engagement. Mr. Chairman, Suriname is committed to the summit process and the mandates which have been adopted. I believe that these mandates also closely align with the SDG agenda at the United Nations. They are very much strategic and address some of the current challenges of development in our hemisphere, a hemisphere which is enormously diverse and therefore have a diversity in priorities and needs as well. So I hope that in the process we keep that in mind, that what is relevant to the Caribbean may not be immediately relevant to other parts in the hemisphere. So we have to keep that diversity in agenda setting as well in mind. A second point I'd like to make, Mr. Chairman, is that setting mandates, agreeing on mandates in consensus, and these are very relevant mandates, it's important to also recognize that we need to be able to implement them and to finance them through technical expertise. So therefore, as in previous summits, I believe it's important to make the connection to national planning, because most of these mandates will have to be executed within the national budget and therefore also in the national planning. And therefore, in the schedule of meetings, I would suggest also to include a meeting, whether at technical or policy level, with the ministries of finance. Often there is a disconnect between political mandates and the execution of that at national level. And without the ministries of finance involved, I believe financing will be challenging. Equally so, in terms of financing and implementation, because that's ultimately what it's about, we need to translate this agenda, these 5 mandates, in the agenda of the Inter-American system, whether that is PAHO, IICA, or the Inter-American Development Bank. If we don't see that translation, and of course the OAS, in their programming, then there is again a disconnect. And the experience from the past years since 1994 is that if that doesn't happen, implementation is poor. But we look forward to the next steps, and I agree with the schedule which has been agreed on. While we discuss these strategic issues, I believe it's also important to keep in track that through the implementation, through the search process, we need to pay attention to some of the current immediate challenges, which will come along the way as well. So I hope we don't forget those immediate challenges in addressing those. For us, for Suriname, but I believe for the Caribbean as well, climate change, economic recovery, including debt restructuring, impact of the global conflict on our economies is of critical importance. And in that sense, I also would like to indicate that regional security, hemispheric security, through proper governance mechanisms is of great importance to make this agenda work. Let me say in closing that we hope that especially the private sector of the hemisphere can be engaged more actively to foster intra-regional trade and also investments. Mr. Chairman, we look forward to attending the 10th summit in the Dominican Republic, and I want to thank Minister Alvarez for offering the Dominican Republic as a host and for his leadership on this file. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'd like to turn now to Guyana.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Guyana commends the leadership of the United States and welcome the substantive outcomes of the 9th summit. We also know that the summit focused attention on areas of high importance for the hemisphere: health and resilience, sustainable green future, energy transition, digital transformation, and democratic governance. Guyana also noted the importance of the implementation and the need for effective support in that regard, including with respect for financing and capacity building where needed. We also recall that work is still pending on the development of an action plan on health and resilience. We note the importance of such an undertaking, given the fact that COVID-19 on the hemisphere, and express support for early conclusion and adoption of the action plan. And lastly, Mr. Chair, we underscore the importance of effective partnerships, including governments, the private sector, civil society, and regional and international organizations to facilitate necessary progress. I would also take this opportunity to give Guyana's support to the Dominican Republic in the hosting of the 10th summit. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can we go now to Canada?
Thank you very much, Secretary Blinken and Secretary General Almagro, for ensuring commitments taken by our leaders in Los Angeles are further developed and implemented. Collective action is key to addressing the global and regional challenges we face. Implementation of the summit commitments is crucial. Canada's priority is to promote and protect democracy. We look forward to implementing the Inter-American Action Plan on Democratic Governance and are prepared to take a leading role in this, as we did in co-chairing the working group to develop the plan. We must move forward quickly with an ambitious calendar, and effective working procedures are necessary to build on our momentum. Canada believes in the principle of nothing about us without us. We are pleased that the framework will provide opportunities for civil society input, but we also encourage the inclusion of women's organizations and Indigenous peoples. Canada looks forward to the upcoming negotiation sessions and surge meetings. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our colleague from Argentina, you have the floor.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary of State, ladies and gentlemen, foreign ministers, Secretary General of the OAS. We first wish to express our appreciation to the United States, to the authorities of the United States for the support and organization of the 9th Summit of the Americas. We also wish to recognize our appreciation to the city of Lima for having so warmly welcomed us. Argentina is in a position to support the proposals shared by the chair because these coincide with our own priorities identified as pro tempore chair of the Economic Commission of Latin America in 2022. As was expressed in the political commitments of the 9th Summit of the Americas, we must emphasize that the implementation of these commitments be inclusive and take into account the historically marginalized and vulnerable groups, emphasizing the need to address gender equality as a cross-cutting aspect important to these proposals and commitments. Let me also underscore the firm commitment of Argentina to work on this with a view to the promotion of human rights and strengthening of democratic institutions. We understand democracy in its broadest sense, incorporating electoral regulations, electoral norms, and with an understanding of the social and human value. We believe that inclusive democracy is one of the key pillars to reach democracy and guarantee social equality. And for this reason, this must guide our efforts to implement the Plan of Action for Democratic Governance, which we jointly approved in Los Angeles. We commit ourselves to continue working hand in hand with other member states on a regional public health policy, as well as in the energy, digital transformation, and other areas which involved our coordination, as well as the work of foreign ministers, and which, following that debate, ended up in these documents, in these resolutions. To conclude, let me once again note that the differences and varieties of our cultural backgrounds must be instruments which make it possible for us to implement these commitments. We work together cooperatively in a spirit of solidarity. Argentina is ever more convinced that our shared history is the best tool for us to work and envisage together a promising future. The urgent needs facing our societies, our countries, call on us to work together for unity of our dear region. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before we move along, I want to underscore that the summit team and the Secretariat are taking note of all of the ideas and initiatives suggested in the different presentations, because I think there have been some very valuable suggestions that we've heard this morning. We want to make sure that not only are we taking note of them, but we're following up on them. With that, let's go to Brazil, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Secretary Antony Blinken, fellow heads of delegation and foreign ministers. Let me note the appreciation of the Brazilian delegation for presiding this meeting of the Summit Implementation Review Group, which not only allows us to review the achievements of the 9th Summit of the Americas, but to look towards the future and to move forward in our commitments taken there in Los Angeles. As Brazil understood and stated, we consider that the 9th Summit of the Americas was successful in allowing us and making it possible for us to assume political commitments on behalf of all of our countries, our continent, and it would not be exaggerated to state on behalf of all of humanity. We also commit ourselves to working on sustainable development, climate change, energy transition, the digital transformation, resiliency, and health, as well as other commitments having to do with strengthening democracy and promotion of human rights. This involves, in each of these cases, of key agenda items, not only for the development of our individual countries in recovering from the pandemic, but for the aspirations and structural change and progress in our entire region. These ambitious engagements and commitments lead us to understand that we have now new and growing commitments. We congratulate the efforts that are to be taken by each country. And in this context, we know that the key responsibility of the surge must be, firstly, to have a regular follow-up on our commitments so as to understand jointly and together what progress we are achieving. We must not only be engaged passively, but we must establish lines of action that will allow us to work together in our region. That is the case, for example, of issues having to do with the mobilization of resources and financing, the engagement of networks of specialists and experts for regional cooperation efforts. More than the creation of newer working groups or negotiators, we envisage that our work must be in an executive spirit having to do with monitoring results. We believe that we have already planned sufficiently, and now what is left is to move to action. We are pleased to see that the recently circulated plan circulated by the U.S. delegation gives us a key mandate to commit to the engagements and the political engagements having to do with public health and resiliency. We also know that there are commitments that have to do with technical aspects that will mobilize our private sectors and regional financial institutions. Along these lines, we consider of particular importance to promote a better articulation of the surge, the summitry process of the OAS. This is not automatically a call to issue proclamations on behalf of the organization, but it's clear that our organization will benefit widely from the commitments taken on. The development agenda must return to being the key effort for us in the Americas to respond to the urgent needs of our population, and this will only be possible using our individual capacities. Let me reiterate the full commitment of Brazil to work collectively, cooperatively, on effective methodologies to achieve visible results for our countries and societies. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. I turn now to Guatemala.
Thank you so much. Excelentísimo.
Honorable Anthony Blinken, Secretary of State of the United States, Cesar Rodrigo Landa, our brother Foreign Minister from the Republic of Peru, heads of delegations, and to the OAS Secretary General, Luis Almagro, James Lambert, Secretary of Hemispheric Affairs from the Organization of American States. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a privilege to be today in the beautiful city of Lima and to represent my country here at this second ministerial meeting of the surge. What we have just heard is a historic achievement for our continent, because we are today celebrating having had a successful Summit of the Americas. The recognition of the commitments taken on at that summit has been well received by the countries that make up this Organization of American States and reflects our commitment to democracy, to the building of a green, sustainable future, health and resiliency in the Americas, and the work to achieve a transition to clean, renewable energy and digital transformation. Mr. Chair, regarding the Plan of Action for Health and Resiliency in the Americas, Guatemala is committed to continue working to undertaking strategies that will address the effects of the pandemic. This plan is important because it has to do with the priorities and the needs that must be understood in our national context, as our dear colleague from Suriname has noted. It's important to understand the diversity of our continent, and particularly the application of public policies that will be effective and result in a transformation in each one of our countries to achieve the purposes and objectives of our summit without any form of discrimination. To make progress on a green future agenda, we also must orient our efforts to the restoration and the protection of biodiversity by means and strategies that would mitigate climate change, sustainability, and resiliency. And we must all work together to harmonize our efforts within a multilateral framework that is going to avoid duplication of efforts. Soon we will be at the COP27, and today we have an opportunity to work together with joint proposals that we may represent together as a unified region without duplicating efforts that would hold us back from achieving success. Guatemala is a enormously diverse, biodiverse country, and we're very pleased to celebrate that we have underway a series of projects to reduce carbon gas emissions, and we also recognize that we are vulnerable to the effects of climate change. So we express our solidarity with the United States and with our brethren in the Caribbean and Central American from the Hurricane Ian. For a transition to a clean and renewable energy, we must work together to have concrete actions that would allow us here, in this forum and in this General Assembly, but particularly as we did at the Summit of the Americas, we must develop a common agenda that would further greater resiliency. We also note that without a political commitment to democratic governance, this will not be possible. For this, we are very aware and will work together to implement the framework of the Convention, of the Inter-American Convention on Human Rights, the Inter-American Charter, and the OAS Charter, which are our key guiding instruments. Let me conclude by noting that at all levels, nationally and internationally, the countries of this hemisphere are committed that this General Assembly be a historic occasion. I also join my efforts in, join my congratulations to the Dominican Republic for hosting the next assembly. Thank you.
I'd like to now turn to Chile. Antonio, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Secretary Blinken. Estimado Secretario.
To the Secretary General of the OAS, the Secretary of State of the Ninth Summit of the Americas and head of the Ninth Summit of the Americas, Anthony Blinken, colleagues, fellow foreign ministers, let me thank you for the convocation to this 9th meeting of the Summit Implementation Review Group that will allow us to move forward on the framework work to further our work on the 5 commitments undertaken at the 9th Summit of the Americas. We also congratulate Peru for having hosted this meeting as well, and congratulate the Dominican Republic for agreeing to be the host of the 10th Summit of the Americas. Of course, you can count on the support and commitment of Chile, and wish you great success in the tasks that you know will undertake with great seriousness. For Chile, the process of the Summit of the Americas opens up the possibility of having a frank dialogue without exclusion, as President Gabriel Boric expressed at the last Summit of the Americas in June in Los Angeles. As a government, then, we want this forum to overcome the polarization that has regrettably dominated hemispheric relations in recent years. Our country participated in the 5 working groups with a view to placing at the center of our discussion the complex economic and political and social circumstances through which our region is living. Within the framework of the negotiations, we also participated in challenging discussions having to do with language on human rights. Amongst, we note, the concept of women and girls in all their diversity. As you will recall, with a view to finding consensus, this language was not included in the 5 political commitments that express the term all women and children. Let me restate that for Chile, this language, this reference is insufficient, as we expressed throughout the surge negotiations in the 9th Summit of the Americas, and is now repeated in the negotiations for documents for this 52nd General Assembly. Dear colleagues, together with the Dominican Republic, Chile headed as co-presidents the group for the transition to a clean energy as a part of our commitment to the Summit of the Americas process, and for the great importance that this has to do with the challenge with climate change and the need for sustainable development. For this reason, we're very pleased to hear the tentative calendar proposed with the presidency and the Secretariat of Summits to have a effective roadmap to achieve the commitments undertaken with concrete actions, as was expressed by the National Coordinator for Chile in the past 6th meeting of the National Coordinators of this on the 15th of September. We hope that the progress made on this tentative calendar and work proposed take into account the need to set deadlines so that member states will make substantive and effective proposals with sufficient time to engage in national consultations so as to make substantive contributions to the 5 commitments in our forum. We note that, as Suriname has mentioned, the need for financing and funding and a necessary coordination with multilateral financing institutions. Chile restates its commitment to the process of the Summit of the Americas and trusts that this next stage will be will allow us to move forward for the benefit of the Americas with great synergy and without duplicating other regional efforts and mechanisms, and rather seek convergence, as others who spoke before me have noted. Let me recall that at the last summit, we extended an invitation to participating member states to strengthen hemispheric cooperation for the strengthening of multilateralism and our institutions, and as a result, our democracy. We believe that only through dialogue and cooperation will we achieve more participatory democracies and be more resilient, a necessary condition to face the challenges in our region and in our world. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Antonio. We turn over now to Mexico.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Foreign ministers, heads of delegation, I would start by expressing on my behalf and that of Mexico, thanks for the hospitality extended by Peru. Mexico is committed to multilateralism, to dialogue and cooperation with which to build common agendas, enabling us to rise to the challenges we face. The last Summit of the Americas enabled us to identify solutions to challenges that the continent faces to ensure inclusive societies. At said summit, Mexico backed proposals respecting countries' sovereignty in keeping with our constitutional foreign policy principles. We thank the Dominican Republic for offering to host the 10th Summit of the Americas, and we calling for this to be an inclusive dialogue, hearing all of the voices of the continent. We agree that the agreements that we cobble together there will translate into concrete benefits to the benefit of everyone. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias. I now recognize the Honorable Representative of Antigua and Barbuda, Sir Ronald.
Yes? Yes. Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, first of all, let me apologize for my late arrival at this meeting. It was due to unforeseen circumstances. No disrespect was meant for anyone. I've taken the chair rather late, simply to say a couple of things. One, the 9th Summit of the Americas was a great success, particularly for the Caribbean. We were very pleased with the outcome of that conference, but we were particularly pleased with the attention that the United States of America, as one of the largest and richest countries of our region, paid to the very peculiar problems of the Caribbean and its instant response in meetings we had with President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris to address those issues immediately. That work, as you know, Mr. Chairman, is ongoing. You are part of it yourself, and we are very pleased with its progress. Having said that, as we look forward now to what will happen with the Summit of the Americas in the future, we are deeply troubled by the state of the world. Because as small countries, we know that our prosperity, our growth, and our development of our people is dependent upon peace and progress. It is for that reason that we express our concern now, and have expressed in the past, our concern about Russia's aggression against Ukraine. It has turned the world upside down. We note with some alarm that the OPEC countries have now decided to cut production on oil. We know that that will result in higher prices for oil, and that our small countries are going to face a disproportionate burden as a result of that. We live on things that need oil to be at a predictable price and at a lower price. Tourism is one of them. But the other is the fact that we import almost everything we produce, including food. And that has a cost beyond what it would be to continental countries because of the remoteness of our islands. We have to import that food, and with it we are importing the high costs of other places. These are challenges we face, and we hope that as the Summit of the Americas develops towards the next summit, that the problems that small states have will not be forgotten. One last point I would like to make, it is this. I think Minister Ramdin has spoken eloquently on the peculiar needs that we face in the Caribbean, and I will not repeat those. But, Mr. Chairman, COVID-19 is not the last pandemic we will see, and we have not recovered from it yet. And unless this summit places as a high priority what we are going to do about future pandemics, we might very well find ourselves in a situation, as we did in COVID-19, in which we are unprepared for it. We, the small countries of the Caribbean, do not have the scientific and other resources to be able to tackle this problem. We would hope, therefore, that in the Summit of the Americas process, we continue to put pandemics at a high priority, particularly the need for preparation. And what we must not see, Mr. Chairman, is the situation in which we saw in COVID-19, where the response was nationalistic, protectionist. I'm looking after me. So we had vaccines not available to the whole community. We had high costs of vaccines beyond the reach of our countries. We had companies unable to sell us those vaccines because they were already bought up and hoarded by the rich. This should not happen again. That mantra that was developed, that none of us are safe until all of us are safe, applies across the board. So, Chair, I would urge that, along with all of the other issues that the Caribbean has put on the table today, the question of a pandemic and preparation for it remains a priority. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and I'll just note that in his intervention, Secretary Blinken did address the first pillar of our commitments, health, as a key priority, and strongly looks forward to are working with all the members of this esteemed organization to the ends that you mentioned. I now have the honor of recognizing the distinguished ambassador of Haiti.
Thank you, Deputy Assistant Secretary.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, ministers, Secretary General, dear friends. I would like to start by thanking our host country, Peru, for its hospitality. I would also like to thank the U.S. delegation for this surge meeting. I agree with those who spoke before me. The 9th Summit of the Americas was a success. And unfortunately, during the summit, important matters were addressed, governance, human rights. This is also the occasion for us to renew our commitment to multilateralism, through which, as we know, that many of these are matters that not one country would be able to address, but for multilateralism, we would like to continue supporting the surge process, whose purpose it is to implement decisions made during the summit. I would like to include, Mr. Chairman, by offering my support to the Dominican, my government support to the Dominican Republic, which is to host the next Summit of the Americas. On behalf of my government, I wish for the Dominican Republic much success. We are fully convinced that you will be considering very important matters on your agenda: climate change, chief among them, human rights, migration, and so forth. And we are here to support the Dominican Republic in your carrying out to the next summit. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Edmund. I now have the honor of recognizing the representative of Jamaica.
Thank you, SG Nichols. On behalf of the government of Jamaica, I wish to convey sincere appreciation to the government of Peru for the very warm hospitality and the excellent arrangements in hosting this meeting in this beautiful city of Lima. I wish also to convey appreciation to the United States as chair, all member states, the staff at the summit's secretariat, the institutions of the joint working group, and the OAS secretariat for the rich contributions and continued support throughout this hemispheric process. Mr. Chairman, the first ministerial meeting of the surge of 2022, convened last June in the margins of the 9th Summit of the Americas in Los Angeles, saw the approval by ministers and later adoption by leaders of the 5 political commitments. We are now delighted that we are now at the point to advance the implementation of the agreed action plans. We also need to agree on the steps to be taken so that the political commitments are able to establish the framework for inclusive partnerships, allow for meaningful dialogue among the private sector, civil society, and youth, enable the Americas to find solutions to our common challenges, particularly in the context of the post-pandemic recovery. In this regard, I thank the Chair for the very comprehensive update on the progress made thus far at the ministerial meeting held at the 9th Summit of the Americas in June. This has provided an overview of where we are and will assist in the establishment of the platform for the exchange of ideas and good practices, the deepening of collaboration, and the means of converting the commitments into concrete actions for the benefit of the people of our hemisphere. We note that the action plan on health care and resilience has broad consensus, and we welcome the update provided by Secretary Blinken this morning on steps already taken to advance implementation of this plan. We can agree that this action plan is sufficiently developed to allow member states to put measures in place to strengthen both national and regional capacities. At the same time, it will be important to pay attention to capacity building, technology transfer, and other means so as to assist member states in moving from ideas towards action. This should be done in an inclusive and transparent manner. In relation to the development of the action plans, it is also imperative that member states, regional and international partners redouble their efforts aimed at mitigation, adaptation, and access to climate financing, environmental protection, and the transition to clean energy, as well as the strengthening of our democratic institutions to foster good governance. Mr. Chairman, the proposed calendar, which was adopted this morning, outlines a program and the working procedures for member states through the establishment of a technical working groups to engage and formulate strategies and to allow for relevant national ministries, departments, and agencies to provide the necessary support and expertise in the development of the action plans. This will ensure implementation at the national level. Most importantly, member states will have the opportunity to report on progress and make recommendations to ensure the fulfillment of the mandates of the political commitments. We hope that this remains an integral part of the process, and we monitor and evaluate our actions as we are doing under the 2018 Lima commitments. Finally, please be assured that Jamaica remains committed to the process, as we are convinced that the continued success of the Summit of the Americas process rests largely on our ability to build strong consensus around a viable inter-American agenda. We will continue to offer our support and cooperation towards that end. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister Campbell. I now have the honor of recognizing Barbados.
Thank you, Mr. President. First and foremost, thanks for the convening of this gathering this morning. We wish to express our sincerest appreciation to the government and the people of Peru for the hospitality that has been extended to us during our stay here in your beautiful country. We also want to offer sincere congratulations and appreciation for the assistance afforded the nations of CARICOM at this summit, and extend our appreciation and thanks to both President Biden and Vice President Harris. We also commend you for the swift action in the establishment of mechanisms to implement the commitments and the political commitments that came out of the summit. Mr. President, the world, though, has changed much since the Summit of the Americas was convened, and therefore integrated into the working plans going forward. We wish to put on the table, the world is at this time faced with three serious crises that threaten the continued march of wholesome and sustained development across the globe. And much of that is being felt right here in the Americas. A cost of living crisis stemming from the war in the Ukraine, a developing country debt crisis following the COVID-19 pandemic and climate-related disasters, and a worsening climate crisis as glaciers melt and storms and droughts intensify. The confluence of these events, Mr. President, is further compounded by tightening monetary policy in developed countries and a strengthening US dollar. 1 in 5 countries is experiencing fiscal and financial stress. If these crises go unaddressed, they will certainly deepen hardship already being felt, being experienced. There will be debt defaults, widening inequality, political upheaval, and a delayed transition to the low-carbon world that is necessary for continued human existence. Global leaders, Mr. President, are now adept and experienced in managing crises. They have the means and they have the knowledge, but we must act now. We cannot and must not create a reputation for rescuing banks and saving corporations. We must also be good at saving countries. The world's leaders must lay a path for a new financial system that drives financial resources towards climate action and the Sustainable Development Goals. These goals require the rapid upscaling of investment in the low-carbon transition in the energy, transportation, and agricultural sectors to safeguard the 1.5 degrees Celsius target that will provide for substantial investment in building climate resilience and sustainability and critical investment in public health and education, particularly in developing countries. The government of Barbados has therefore proposed a three-step process to tackling these vexing and developmentally debilitating challenges. Step one must be the provision of emergency liquidity to the developing world. Step two, the expansion of multilateral lending to developing states. And step three, the establishment of novel multilateral mechanisms to activate private sector savings for climate mitigation and to fund reconstruction after a climate disaster. Mr. President, this is a call for collective action. We must mobilize and coordinate broad support and existence for a coalition of like-minded global leaders that are aligned on the steps in this critical agenda and that will support its implementation. And we are calling for this process to be included in the steps going forward out of the summit and for the United States to use their global leadership to ensure that it is achieved. I'm obliged to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Lynch. And I would boldly note that our hemisphere has the opportunity to select new leadership for the Inter-American Development Bank, and the sentiments expressed widely here on the type of engagement that we need from our multilateral development banks, I hope will play a role in countries thinking on who would best assume that role. I now have the opportunity and the honor to recognize the Secretary General of the Organization of American States. Secretary General Almagro, over to you.
I would like to acknowledge the Dominican Republic's offer to host the 10th summit and all the work that the Foreign Minister Alvarez has done to this effect. And the Secretariat is going to be in good hands, and I'm certain that it's going to be a success at the Dominican Republic. Thank you.
I do not see any other delegation that is asking to be recognized at this time. I will then simply note that I am deeply grateful to all of the staff and personnel who have worked over the course of years for the United States presidency of this process, and our deep appreciation for their efforts as we transition to the Dominican Republic, which I note has received several statements of support for their hosting the 10th summit. I'm sure that all of us will give them their full support for the both logistical and the political efforts that they will undertake. I'd like to reaffirm our commitment to all of you for the United States' steadfast efforts to implement the 5 commitments that our leaders have made in the summit process. And we want to ensure that the Los Angeles summit delivers a legacy of addressing our shared challenges, creating hope and opportunities for all the peoples of the Americas, and building a sustainable, resilient, and equitable future for our hemisphere. With that, this meeting is adjourned.
Pero que no se caiga, pero que yo pueda poner la cosa. No, pero aparte de la silla. Bueno, fíjate, ahí vamos. Ya. Panamá pasó de 150 diarios legales a 2.500. Ahora estamos empezando 2.000 diarios. Vuelco de chat. No, ponen un chat. Un tren.
Hoy, esta organización es el guardián regional en defensa de la democracia, la libertad y los derechos humanos. Los países se han comprometido con estos valores a través de instrumentos legales como la Carta Democrática Interamericana, la Convención Americana de Derechos Humanos y todas las demás convenciones interamericanas. Nuestro trabajo es mantener los más altos estándares. Debemos ser objetivos, analizar los hechos, denunciar cuando veamos corrupción, inequidad o amenazas a la libertad. En esos casos no podemos ser neutrales.
More than 100 years since the inauguration of this building, the OAS headquarters, our institution still brings together the peoples of the Americas to address our responsibilities as a partnership of nations. As we look to the future, our work must also focus on the construction of a positive agenda that continues to favorably impact millions of lives every day.
The COVID-19 pandemic brought unprecedented challenges to our member states and the people we serve. In response, the OAS Secretariat for Integral Development adopted a three-pronged approach by 1. Adjusting our portfolio of existing projects, 2. Exploring new projects to meet emerging needs, and 3. Expanding multi-sectoral partnerships. The results achieved in 2020 demonstrate the resilience of our member states and the commitment of the OAS SETI to work with member states and partners towards our common goals in the development of our region. Our Network on Competitiveness launched the COVID-19 Ideas Accelerator, sharing 250 tools, health solutions, responses, and recovery plans. The Network for Labor Administration published a portfolio of responses from ministries of labor to COVID-19, sharing over 420 measures taken to protect workers, employment, and income. Likewise, the Inter-American Teacher Education Network series, Teaching STEM in Quarantine, provided 117,000 teachers with key tools to continue advancing STEM education during the pandemic. Through its network and platforms, the Inter-American Committee on Ports promoted international and national best practices, guidelines, protocols, and recommendations on COVID-19 safety measures and continuity of logistic operations. Initiatives such as the Education in Times of Change platform allowed us to meet urgent needs by offering timely tools on virtual education and a dedicated space for ministries to share strategies, actions, and solutions. Other programs such as the Row Fund stepped up, providing emergency grants to offset the challenges imposed on our students by the pandemic. SETI's partnerships are adding value to member states in the form of technical assistance, training, and access to tools and services. In partnership with leading private sector institutions, we offered micro, small, and medium enterprises access to online tools and training, increasing their visibility and participation in e-commerce, a key to their survival and growth in the pandemic and post-pandemic era. A new OAS SETI Facebook initiative provided 85,000 MSMEs across the region with capacity building opportunities and WhatsApp business tools to aid response, recovery, and resilience building. The Caribbean Small Business Development Centers program achieved real impact, supporting new businesses, expanding sales, and driving growth. A new network of Caribbean SPDCs will broaden the program's reach. The Inter-American Committee on Tourism, the CTOUR, convened ministerial-level policy dialogue in an urgent response to the impact of the pandemic on the hard-hit tourism and hospitality sectors. Policymakers and experts discussed biosanitary protocols, travel and visa facilitation, among other critical areas for the sector's recovery. Partnering with the George Washington University and the U.S. Bureau of Indian Affairs, we went ahead with the scheduled first Indigenous Tourism Forum of the Americas, pivoting to a virtual format and convening over 240 participants from indigenous communities, the private sector, and governments. SETI also integrated sustainable development practices in the COVID-19 response. The pandemic is a daily reminder of the links between water, health, sanitation, food security, and nutrition. We ensured the continuity of our water management projects in the Plata Basin and worked with governments and partners in the design of an investment portfolio valued at $90 million. Additionally, the Energy and Climate Partnership of the Americas continued to share relevant best practices and responses to the pandemic on energy and air quality. These few examples indicate our collective impact. We cannot do this alone. It is now more urgent than ever to address the region's structural weaknesses, to recover from the health, economic, and social crises occasioned by the pandemic and prepare for future shocks. It is imperative that we work together as we risk losing recent development gains and seeing millions fall back into poverty. It is time for the region to redirect course and pursue a more sustainable, resilient, and equitable future for all. We are in this together.
But the resilience building agenda is too big for any one stakeholder to address acting alone, and simply bringing together stakeholders, whether at the national, subnational, regional, or global level, is not enough. Effective, focused, and sustained coordination among stakeholders is paramount to provide countries with integrated and comprehensive support.
The OAS, as a hemispheric forum and honest broker, must continue to facilitate this process while we work with member states towards the attainment of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. Cooperation, collaboration, and partnerships that include all actors strengthen us, enabling us to be more than the sum of our parts. We can and we must work together. The future of our region depends on it.
On September 11, 2001, in Lima, Peru, the OAS General Assembly adopted, with the unanimous vote of its member states, the Inter-American Democratic Charter. This resolution was the result of a request that the Summit of the Americas, meeting in April of that year in Quebec, made to the regional organization. This charter is the final link in a pioneering development of the Inter-American system since the adoption in Bogota in 1948 of the charter by which the Organization of American States was established. The context surrounding its adoption was very different from that of previous decades.
The decade of the 90s was unique for the hemisphere. In South America, military regimes realized that modern societies were too complicated to be ruled with bayonets. In Central America, the Cold War, the proxy war between the United States and the Soviet bloc had worn itself out, and there was a sense that the only solution was not military, but political and democratic.
The Democratic Charter took advantage of this moment to define that representative democracy is the sum of many elements that comprise it, and it lists the essential ones among them: respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms, access to power and its exercise subject to the rule of law, the holding of free, periodic, and fair elections, the pluralistic system of political parties and organizations, and the separation and independence of the branches of government. But that was not enough.
En muchos de los países de América del Sur, los países de América Central también estaban terminando largos periodos dictatoriales, generalmente terminados además en conflictos, guerras civiles muy dolorosas. Entonces, el primer trabajo en el marco de la OEA es: no queremos más los golpes militares. Ese fue el primer entorno, y sobre eso hubo un consenso a principios de los 90. Pero luego se fueron produciendo estas nuevas modalidades de alteración, y ahí se genera un nuevo consenso en la región. Tampoco queremos estas nuevas modalidades de alteración del orden constitucional.
These new modalities had a specific form. Legitimately elected governments were the ones that subverted democracy. Thus, the Charter contemplated mechanisms to face the case of a threat, a serious alteration or even rupture of the democratic order.
La defensa interamericana de la democracia es el concepto fundamental. También lo es la democracia como derecho de los pueblos de las Américas. Esos son los dos puntos no solamente es una responsabilidad de cada país defender la democracia en el hemisferio, sino que son todos los países responsables de la defensa de la democracia en el hemisferio y la Secretaría General.
At the very moment the charter was being approved in Lima, the world was convulsed by the attacks in New York and Washington, D.C. The next day, the world would no longer be the same. Thanks to the charter,
Quórum confirmado.
Perfecto.
Confirmed.
Buenos días, señor presidente.
Good morning.
Quiero confirmarle que tenemos 29 delegaciones
Let
en
me
sala y tenemos...
advise you that 29 delegations are present in the room. We have confirmed quorum. I also wish to report to the delegations that requesting the floor will not be done using your nameplate. If you'd like to request the floor, push the button, and automatically on the screens you will see the order of the floor as requested.
To raise your flag, you don't need to raise the name of your country. You simply press the button as if to speak on the microphone, and the name of your country, your delegation, will appear on the screen. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I confirm we have quorum, sir.
Thank you. Señoras.
Ladies and gentlemen, heads of delegations, good morning. To the representatives of the member states, Mr. Secretary General of the OAS, Assistant Secretary General of the OAS, ladies and gentlemen of the permanent observer missions before the OAS, representatives of the civil society organizations and other social actors, special guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is for me a great honor to address the first plenary of the 52nd regular session of the General Assembly of the Organization of American States. I wish to begin expressing our thanks to His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Peru, Pedro Castillo, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Cesar Landa, and to the people of Peru, particularly to the authorities and citizens of this city for the warm welcome shown to us. It is now our duty to move to the election of the President or the Chair of this 52nd regular session of the General Assembly of the Organization of American States. And for that, I offer the floor to the various delegations here assembled. Antigua and Barbuda, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Antigua and Barbuda has the distinct honor to nominate the distinguished Foreign Minister of Peru, Cesar Landa, to be the chairman of this 52nd regular session of the General Assembly of the Organization of American States.
Gracias.
Thank you. Argentina. Thank you, Mr. Chair. It is an honor to second the proposal just made by Antigua and Barbuda for the designation of the Foreign Minister of Peru, Cesar Landa, as President of this General Assembly. Thank you. We propose then approval of this nomination by acclamation. His Excellency, Don Cesar Landa, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Peru, allow me to express on behalf of all present delegations and in my own name our sincere congratulations for your election as Chair of the 52nd regular session of the General Assembly of the Organization of American States, and wish you success in this task. Let me invite you to take your place in the head table. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Muy buenos días, señoras y señores, ministros de Relaciones Exteriores y jefes de delegación, señor presidente del Consejo Permanente y de la Comisión Preparatoria de la Asamblea General, embajador Martin Schalwick, representante permanente de la República de Surinam ante la OEA, señoras y señores representantes de los Estados miembros, señor secretario general don Luis Almagro, señor secretario general adjunto embajador Néstor Méndez, señoras y señores observadores permanentes ante la OEA, representantes de los organismos internacionales, representantes de las organizaciones de la sociedad civil y otros actores sociales, invitados e invitadas especiales, señoras y señores. Para el Gobierno del Perú y para mí en lo personal, es un destacado honor presidir el 52º periodo ordinario de sesiones de la Asamblea General de la Organización de los Estados Americanos, siendo esta la tercera oportunidad en la que el Perú recibe este compromiso y la primera en la que, con el esfuerzo de los Estados miembros, la Secretaría General de la OEA y el Gobierno de mi país hemos logrado retomar el formato presencial después de 2 años debido a la pandemia del COVID-19. Quiero agradecer las palabras de mis colegas al distinguido embajador Ronald Sanders, jefe de la delegación de Antigua y Barbuda, y al distinguido secretario de Relaciones Exteriores de la República Argentina, Pablo Temati, por su amabilidad y voto de confianza al proponer mi nombre y al secundar la nominación, respectivamente, para presidir las deliberaciones del presente periodo ordinario de sesiones de la Asamblea General. También deseo agradecer a la Asamblea General por haber aceptado esta nominación y por confiar en mi persona.
Tenemos un tema técnico en la interpretación. Un momentito.
Sí. Hay un tema técnico de interpretación.
There's a technical issue having to do with interpretation. We'll resolve it and return.
Entonces acá viene lo de Venezuela. Ya.
Cabina de interpretación.
Confirming interpretation booths. English booth. Confirming the English booth.
Rápidamente.
Having confirmed, we move to confirm the French booth. French booth, Portuguese booth. With apologies, I will restate the remarks that I made at the outset. I was saying that for the government of Peru and for me personally, it is a distinct honor to preside this 52nd General Session of the General Assembly, this being the third occasion on which Peru assumes this role, and with the support of the government of my country, member states, and the General Secretariat, we are again able to meet in person after several years of the COVID-19 pandemic. I also thank the ambassador, the distinguished Secretary of Foreign Ministers, Pablo de Tamante, head of the Argentine delegation, for having proposed and then seconded my nomination to preside the deliberations of this 52nd General Session of the General Assembly. I also thank the General Assembly for having accepted this nomination and for entrusting me with the distinct responsibility that this entails. Distinguished Ministers of Foreign Affairs, heads of delegation, on behalf of Peru, please be welcome to the city of Lima, which once again is receiving this hemispheric gathering to work together in fighting discrimination and inequality. As I already shared with the Permanent Council of our organization on the 30th of June, this 52nd regular session of the General Assembly, which begins today, must call on us to reflect and to work to avoid the deepening divide, which have only increased in an alarming fashion since the COVID-19 pandemic. I make myself available to all delegations to facilitate the political dialogue that gathers us here. I express my best wishes for the success of the General Assembly's work. The next item on our agenda is the approval of the theme of this 52nd General Session, regular session of the General Assembly, as proposed in Article 34 of our regulations. This was agreed to by the Preparatory Commission of the General Assembly over the course of the preparatory sessions for this 52nd regular session, published as Document 5742, Revision 1. Regardless, as is known by the distinguished delegations in the meeting of last Monday, the 3rd of October, there was a request made for this introduction and an addition of a new point to be considered by the Permanent Mission of Antigua and Barbuda in its own name and on behalf of the Permanent Missions of Bahamas, Barbados, Belize, Bolivia, Dominica, Grenada, Mexico, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and Trinidad and Tobago, entitled Revocation of the Acceptance of a Permanent Representative before the OAS designated by the National Assembly of Venezuela in January of 2019. This is document AG/5785/22. The new point being requested would have the same title as just read. Foreign ministers and heads of delegation on behalf, in keeping with the proposal, in keeping with Article 33 of the regulation, which establishes that once the regular session of the Assembly General has begun, only urgent matters may be added to the agenda, and this with a vote of 2/3 of those present. Is there an agreement to include this matter, revoking the designation of a permanent representative before the OAS designated by the National Assembly of Venezuela in January of 2019? This is a proposed issue on the agenda of the 52nd regular session of the General Assembly. And I give the floor to delegations that wish to address this issue, this point.
Representatives of Antigua and Barbuda requested the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, my delegation asks for the floor to make a few remarks about this request for the inclusion of a new item in the agenda of this 52nd regular session of the General Assembly, titled Withdrawal of the Acceptance of a Permanent Representative to the OAS designated by the National Assembly of Venezuela of January 2019. The resolution that installed the representative was taken by the General Assembly on June 28, 2019. No General Assembly resolution can be withdrawn or otherwise altered except by another meeting of the General Assembly, which is why this item is before this Assembly now. We've opened this opportunity for member states for the following reasons. Venezuela withdrew from the OAS when, in accordance with Article 143 of the Charter, it properly notified the Secretary General on April 27, 2017, that it had denounced the OAS Charter. According to Article 143, the Charter stopped being enforced for Venezuela on April 27, 2019, when it ceased to be a member of the OAS. That is why this space properly has no one in that seat. Despite this, on June 28, 2019, a resolution was adopted by a majority of the barest number of votes, 19, which included the vote of the disputed representative of the National Assembly. In other words, the person who was in dispute had a right to vote illegally and cast it. And this Assembly in 2019 accepted that situation. No conventions or rules that guide international organizations allows for a permanent representative or ambassador to be appointed by a National Assembly. This authority rests with a head of state, a head of government, or a foreign minister. We, all of us in this room, know that ambassadors and permanent representatives were not appointed by our national assemblies. Governments represented here know that the standard for, and in international practice, is that one of those three persons have to nominate the representative. Accepting a nomination of a president of any national assembly conforms to no customary practice or rules in any international institution, including in this Organization of American States. Now, even if the National Assembly and its president had the right to appoint an ambassador and a permanent representative, that National Assembly of 2019 effectively and factually ended in January 2021, when the extended term that it gave itself came to an end. The authority of that National Assembly has no validity, no legitimacy, no legality. Operative paragraph 1 of the General Assembly resolution that accepted the permanent representative to the OAS designated by the National Assembly of Venezuela of January 2019 is not consistent with the provisions of the OAS Charter. This is an opportunity to correct that error. This is an effort to maintain the credibility, the authority, and the integrity of the Organization of American States. And that is what we, who have sponsored this resolution, are trying to achieve. We have an opportunity, all of us, to return the OAS to the principles of its charter. Whatever perceived political objectives might have influenced the General Assembly resolution of June 28, 2019. Mr. Chairman, I now formally propose that in accordance with Article 33 of the Rules of Procedure, this General Assembly now vote by roll call to include this item on the agenda of this 52nd regular session. Before I do so, Mr. Chairman, one further caution. I'll be quick. In the 7 years that I have been here as a permanent representative and ambassador of Antigua and Barbuda, 2/3 majority is 23 votes. All of a sudden, it has become 24 for this assembly. I don't know how that happened, because there was no vote on that by any member state, no decision by the Permanent Council on that, no decision by a General Assembly on that. And if anybody tells me that they are calculating it on the basis that Cuba is still a member state of this organization, I will ask this simple question: where is the Cuban cheer and where is the Cuban flag? As far as we are concerned, what has operated over the last 7 years since I've been here, and that is a 2/3 majority, is 23 votes is what should apply. Now, I know that occasionally the legal department of the Secretariat dreams up all kinds of reasons and gives them to us as what we should accept. But on this one, I ask that we go beyond the views of one man. This is an important matter for the OAS to decide. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
The representative of Trinidad and Tobago has requested the floor.
Good morning, Chair. On behalf of the delegation of Trinidad and Tobago, this being the first occasion in which we take the floor, before even adding any comments to follow from the statement delivered by the delegation of Antigua and Barbuda, I wish to extend congratulations from this delegation on your election to chair this 52nd General Assembly. Chair, this delegation takes the floor now only to second the call and to support the call that there be a nominal roll call vote taken as proposed by the delegation of Antigua and Barbuda. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other delegation? Or, according to the request made by the delegation, we will proceed to a vote to see if the General Assembly will approve the addition of withdrawal of acceptance of a permanent representative to the OAS appointed by the National Assembly in January of 2019 on the draft agenda for this General Assembly. I would suggest that this vote be by roll call based on Article 67 of the Rules of Procedure. And so being, we will proceed, that is in keeping with Article 33 of the Rules of Procedure. Such an addition to the draft agenda will require a 2/3 vote of the member states, 24, according to Article 67 of the same Rules of Procedure. No representative may interrupt the vote, save as a matter of relative order. That said, I would ask the Secretariat whether we have the quorum called for in Article 52 of the Rules of Procedure to proceed.
The Secretariat confirms that we do have the quorum.
El nombre que sale es Nicaragua, pero está.
The name that came up was Nicaragua, but Nicaragua is absent. Antigua and Barbuda has the floor.
Mr. Chairman, I apologize for taking the floor again. I truly do not want to make your life difficult, nor do I want to delay the proceedings of this assembly. But I did ask the question about what constitutes a two-thirds majority. For the last 7 years, every two-thirds majority vote has been 23. And unless the Secretariat can produce resolutions that show that it was 24, my delegation cannot accept that it is 24 for the reasons that I've stated earlier. The precedent has been 23, based on the fact that Cuba was not counted. So that matter has to be clarified as a matter of principle. It doesn't have to do with just this resolution. It has to do with principle.
Given that request of Antigua and Barbuda, I'd ask the Secretariat to answer that question in legal terms, please. Mr. Chairman, this very same issue was raised some time back, and we issued a report to the Permanent Council about Cuba's situation in the organization. Being a founding member of this organization, Cuba was suspended in 1962, applying the Inter-American Treaty and reciprocal assistance, not of the OAS Charter. And in 2009, that sanction was lifted unanimously in San Pedro Sula, Honduras. And so from that point on, the doors opened for Cuba's active participation in this organization. The same thing happened when a meeting was convened regarding the situation in Venezuela, which has not expressed any interest in taking part, but that does not interrogate its status of member state. Cuba did not denounce the Charter or the Reciprocal Assistance Treaty. There are 35 member states, therefore, and Cuba's flag has always been flown, and in any official document of the organization, Cuba has appeared as a member state. It could have denounced the TR and the Charter, as numerous states have done. Cuba never did so. It voted against that sanction of 62. It took part in that meeting at Punta del Este of 62, and it did not renounce the organization's charter. It's always in the General Assembly and the Permanent Council, 35 member states was the basis of our operation. I don't recall, I don't have the record. It's the Secretariat of the General Assembly and that of the Permanent Council. And there has not been any vote in which the basis has not been of 35 member states. 2/3 of 35 is 23.3. 23.3. Now, as each state has a whole vote, there are no decimals. And 23 is under 2/3. We have no other choice but to go to the next whole number, which would be 24, for us to have at least 2/3 or more. 23 would be under 2/3, because it's 23.3, as I said. Now, I've been at the General Assembly, or attended the General Assembly for 30 years. I don't recall any vote in which the basis was not that of 35 member states, 2/3 of which are 23.3. I don't have any memory of it ever being different. I give the floor back to Antigua and Barbuda.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Grigi has given us a very long-winded, as usual, presentation about history, but he's not presented the evidence that I have asked for. The evidence is quite simple. In the last 7 years, have we, in any one of the organs of this institution, General Assembly, Permanent Council, or anywhere else, had a two-thirds majority of more than 23? That is the simple question that I would like answered. Show me the precedent, and I will shut up.
I would request those precedents of those that keep the minutes of all the proceedings, which is the Secretariat of this Assembly and of the Permanent Council, not the Legal Department Secretary. Thank you. I hope that this matter can be resolved on a timely basis. I would ask, meanwhile, for us to proceed with the vote. Assistant Secretary, please, let's proceed and vote.
We will proceed with the roll call, starting with Jamaica, which was selected by lot. Jamaica, how do you vote? Jamaica?
Jamaica abstains.
Thank you, Jamaica. Mexico, how do you vote?
In favor.
Perdón, México, repite, por favor.
Please repeat that, Mexico. In favor.
Yes.
Thank you, Mexico.
Nicaragua está ausente.
Nicaragua is absent. Panama, what is your vote? In favor. Moving on to Paraguay. What is your vote? No. Thank you, Paraguay. Delegation of Peru. Peru in favor. In favor. Thank you, Peru. Dominican Republic. We abstain. Abstention.
How do you vote?
In favor.
Thank you, St. Kitts and Nevis. The delegation of St. Lucia, how do you vote?
Categorical yes.
Thank you, St. Lucia. The delegation of St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
In favor.
Thank you, St. Vincent. The delegation of Suriname.
In favor.
Thank you, Suriname. The delegation of Trinidad and Tobago.
In favor.
Thank you, Trinidad and Tobago. The delegation of Uruguay.
We abstain. Please repeat. Abstention. Thank you. Delegation of Venezuela, absent.
You vote.
In favor.
La delegación de Argentina.
The delegation of Argentina, how do you vote? In favor. Thank you, Argentina.
Bahamas.
In favor.
Thank you, the Bahamas. The delegation of Barbados.
In favor.
Thank you, Barbados. The delegation of Belize.
In favor.
Thank you, Belize. La delegación de Bolivia.
The delegation of Bolivia, in favor. Thank you, Bolivia. The delegation of Brazil, abstention. Thank you, Brazil.
Against.
Thank you, Canada. La delegación de Chile.
Delegation of Chile, in favor. Thank you, Chile. The delegation of Colombia, in favor. Thank you, Colombia. The Costa Rican delegation. Abstention. Thank you, Costa Rica.
Favor.
Thank you, Dominica. La delegación del Ecuador.
The delegation of Ecuador. Abstention. Thank you, Ecuador. The delegation of El Salvador. Abstention. Thank you, El Salvador.
Of America.
United States votes against.
Thank you, the United States. The delegation of Grenada.
In favor.
Thank you, Grenada. La delegación de Guatemala.
The delegation of Guatemala. Against. Thank you, Guatemala.
Guyana abstains.
Can you repeat that, sir? Sorry.
Guyana abstains.
Abstains. Thank you. La delegación de Haití.
The delegation of Haiti. Abstention. Thank you, Haiti. The delegation of Honduras. In favor. Please repeat. In favor. Thank you, Honduras. Mr. Chairman, if you just give us a couple of minutes to tally this vote.
Señor Presidente, con su...
Mr. Chairman, with your leave, we now will report on the tally. The tally is as follows. In favor, 19 delegations. Against, 4 delegations. 9 delegations abstained, and 2 are absent. Thank you. After that vote, the requested matter of withdrawal of the acceptance of the permanent representative of OAS appointed by the National Assembly of Venezuela in 2019 is not accepted, and so we suggest that the draft agenda of the 52nd General Assembly be approved. AG Doc 5791/21, Corrigendum 1, without the inclusion of the new requested topic. That said, Antigua and Barbuda has the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, my country believes in the rule of law. We believe in multilateralism. We believe that what happened here today was not a victory for those who voted against. There were only 4 of them, and that is significant. Only 4 countries voted against this, and we know why they voted against it, even though some of them are dealing directly with a de facto government and a de jure government in Venezuela. Yet they deny that somebody created out of the nothing is the president of the country and has the right to have a representative here. We all know that is wrong. But look, at the end of the day, we did not win the 2/3 majority that is necessary. We will abide by that. We believe in rules. However, I must record that nobody won here today. The Organization of American States lost. It lost once again its credibility to do the right and proper thing, and that is to stand by the tenets and principles of its charter. I must record, however, Mr. Chairman, what I've done before, and that is that my delegation will not at any time recognize any vote on any matter, whether it is a declaration or resolution or a statement, that includes a majority that has a vote by the representative of Juan Guaido in whatever capacity he is, casting a vote in this organization. But, Mr. Chairman, we have to get on with the business of the OAS. And you are now have in your hands the responsibility of doing that. I want to pledge to you, sir, my cooperation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now that the draft agenda has been approved, I don't know if there is any other proposal. Otherwise, let's move to the consideration of item 4 on today's order of business, the adoption of the draft calendar of the 52nd regular session of the General Assembly, AG Doc 5775/22. In this draft calendar, we observe that the closing session is slated for 7 p.m. Tomorrow, Friday, October 7th, and so I would prevail upon the delegations to cooperate so that we can conclude the consideration of the matters on the agenda on time. I would like to address some adjustments, those adjustments that are necessary to introduce into the draft calendar are subject to the powers assigned to the President according to Article 15 of the Rules of Procedure of the GA. So there not being an objection, the draft calendar is approved. Next. Formalizing the agreements adopted by the Preparatory Committee of the GA, and for this I would offer the floor to Ambassador Martin Schaukwick, Permanent Representative of Suriname and Chair of the Preparatory Committee, to present the report on said activities in preparation of this regular session. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Distinguished Ministers of Foreign Affairs and heads of delegations, OAS Secretary General Mr. Luis Almagro, Assistant Secretary General Ambassador Nestor Mendez, distinguished members of the delegations of the OAS, member states and permanent observers, representatives of international and civil society organizations, special guests, ladies and gentlemen, as current chairman of the Preparatory Committee of the General Assembly, I have the honor to present to this plenary the report on the activities carried out by the committee in compliance with the responsibilities assigned to it by the Rules of Procedure of the General Assembly. Mr. Chair, the report has been distributed to all delegations as AG document 5786/22 and contains a summary of the meetings and the issues discussed at them. I will therefore, in the interest of time, refer to the agreements, documents, and recommendations adopted by the Preparatory Committee for this 52nd regular session of the General Assembly. The committee held one meeting on August 30, and the Permanent Council, in accordance with Article 91.f of the Charter of the organization, acted as Preparatory Committee during its regular meetings held on June 15, September 7, and September 21st. In those meetings, based on the results of the work of the Subcommittee on Agenda and Procedure, under the chairmanship of Ambassador Harold Forsyth of Peru, the Preparatory Committee agreed on the draft agenda and draft schedule. They also agreed on the procedural matters for this regular session and the selection of Costa Rica and Portugal by lot to occupy the first place in the order of precedence of the delegations of member states and permanent observers, respectively. in accordance with the provisions of Article 4 of the Rules of Procedure of the General Assembly. During this period of activities, Ambassador Luann Gilchrist of St. Vincent and the Grenadines was responsible for chairing the preparatory committee, and I want to take a moment to especially thank her for all the incredible work achieved. Before concluding, I would like to thank the Assistant Secretary General and his team for their professionalism and commitment to the process of preparing for the General Assembly through the preparatory committee. They made it possible for us